Parshas Vaychi. Vaychi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim 17 shana. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. Rashi, right out of the blocks, asks a question that we need to explain in order to understand. And he gives an answer that we need to explain in order to understand. What does Rashi say? Rashi's question, and as we've noted in the past, it's not always the case, frequently, or most frequently, the case that Rashi doesn't ask the question that he answers. Here he does. That's helpful, but we still need to understand the question. Lama Parsha zo stuma. Why is this Parsha closed? We'll talk about it. Lefi shekivan sheniftar Yaakov Avinu, from the moment that Jacob, our father, passed away, nistimu einehem v'libam shel Yisrael mitzaras hashibud. The eyes and the hearts of the Israelites, of the Jews, were closed from the troubles of the enslavement, sheschilu l'shabdam, that they began to enslave them or to oppress them. So we have a number of questions. First of all, Rashi's question is Lama Parsha zo stuma. Why is this Parsha closed? What does that mean? What does it mean? Why is the Parsha closed? Next question. We say that once Yaakov died, the eyes of the children of Israel, the Bnei Israel, were closed to the tsaros of the shibud, to the pain or the trouble of the enslavement. Well, wait a second. Chazal say, in Seder Olam, it's quoted in many Rishonim, that the enslavement only began once the last of the shvatim, of the tribes, of the sons of Yaakov, had died. According to tradition, that is Levi. And he certainly hadn't passed away. Yosef hadn't passed away. None of the children of Yaakov had passed away when Yaakov passed away. So what does Rashi mean? I mean, it could be that Rashi's following a different tradition, but there's no apparent basis for that claim other than the explicit words of Rashi here. So what exactly does he mean? So number one, what does it mean that this Parsha is stuma, is closed? And what does it mean that, or how could it be that the tsaros of the shibud, the troubles of the enslavement, began only once Yaakov died? So let's look at, to answer the first question, what is a Parsha stuma? So first, let's explain that sometimes different phenomenon have the same terminology. So there are different types of spacing in the Torah, in the actual writing of the Torah. And if you just flip the pages, and I'm using a one of the many Koran Chumashim here, okay? So if you just randomly flip pages, you see space, 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 big space. So there are two types of spacing, and they set off what are called parshios. We talk about Parshas Shavua. That's the entire segment, the entire section, or the group of passages that are read on a given Shabbos. That's called a Parshas HaShavua, sometimes also referred to as the Sidra. And then the paragraphs within the Torah are also referred to as parshios. It can be a little confusing. So here we have, here's a parsha which is only 2 sentences, because there's white space here and there's white space here. But you'll notice that there is white space that is on the same line, and then there's white space like here, where the line ends in white space. So these are 2 different types of passage ending signals, or spaces. The short one, which is the type that the writing continues, is called a stuma. It's closed. The one where the parsha ends and the rest of the line is white is called a psucha. Stuma means closed. Psucha means open. That is not what Rashi is talking about. What is Rashi talking about? So let's look at, he says that the configuration of this parsha is unique. It's stuma. It's closed. It's closed in a way that nothing else is closed. So let's look at some other parshios, the beginnings of the parshios. I've marked them off over here. I hope we can convey this. Okay, this is between Vayishlach and Vayeshev, white space. Okay, next. I skipped one. Let's go backwards, and we'll see over here. This is between Vayetze and Vayishlach. Lots of white space. We call that a psucha. Okay, let's skip over here to between Vayeshev and Miketz. Psucha goes to the end of the line, right? Let's do another one. Between Miketz and Vayigash, there's white space. That white space happens to be called stuma. Again, that's not what Rashi's talking about. What's Rashi talking about? Looky here. Here we have the end of Parshas Vayigash. It says, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen, and Israel dwelled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. Vayeachazuva, and they were seized of it. In other words, they held on to the land, or they possessed the land. Vayifru vayirbu ma'od, and they multiplied, they reproduced, and they multiplied exceedingly. And then our Parsha begins on the same line with no space whatsoever. Vaychi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, and Yaakov lived in Eretz Mitzrayim. There's no opening here at all. There's no white space. If you look over here, no white space. Rashi is saying, why is there no white space in this Parsha? Why is that a question? Well, we know that the writing of the Torah and the methodology of the Torah is fundamentally based on a transmission of the tradition from Ezra HaSofer. From Ezra. And Ezra did not put space between Vayigash and Vayichi. That's Rashi's question. When Rashi says, Lama Parsha Zol Stuma, why is this Parsha closed? What he's saying is, why is there not a tradition to put white space between the previous Parsha and this Parsha, as does occur with every single other Parsha in the Torah? How come? Okay, so now at least we understand Rashi's question. Now we have the question that we asked also, and Rav Schwab asks it, and others ask it as well, before say Rashi. How could it be that Rashi thinks that the Tzaras HaShibud began with the death of Yaakov? Now, it happens to be based on Medrash Rabbah and other sources. It's established in Chazal. So how do we reconcile that, or do we say that it's just two different things? So Rav Schwab says, look at what else is going on in the Parsha. Look at what else is going on in the rest of the Parsha. Yaakov passes away. Let's talk about Misha Meis Yaakov, when Yaakov dies. What happens? So the verse in Perek Nun, Pasuk Daled, 50, chapter 50, verse 4, says, Vaya'avru yemei b'chiyaso, and the days of crying, of weeping for Yaakov passed. Vayidaber Yosef el beis Paro lemor, and Joseph spoke to the house of Paro, saying, Im no matzasi chen beinechem, if I have found favor in your eyes, dabru na ba'oznei Paro lemor, speak, please, in the ears of Paro, saying, Avi hishbiani lemor, my father made me swear, saying, Hine anochi meis b'kivri asher karisi li be'eretz Canaan shama tikreni. Behold, I am dying. Bury me in the grave that I have dug for myself in the land of Canaan. And so please let me go up. I'll go up and bury my father, and I'll come back. I'll return. Rav Schwab says, this is Yosef. This is the second in command over all of Egypt. He's literally lobbying Paro. Let's listen again. Yosef, who did Yosef speak to? He didn't speak to Paro. He spoke to the house of Paro. Somebody in the administration. If I found favor in your eyes, listen to this. This is Yosef saying, if I found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Paro, saying, my father made me promise to bury him in the land of Canaan. It is manifest that Yosef is losing his power, his authority, has lost some of his authority, perhaps all of his authority. Perhaps he's no longer even in charge of the government. Instead of making the rules, he's pleading politely, perhaps in a dignified way. And Rav Schwab says also that you see that Yaakov anticipated that there would be a loss of power by Yosef, and therefore he made Yosef promise, which answers a question we didn't ask, which is, if Yaakov trusted Yosef, why does he make him promise to bury him? He was fortifying him, says Rav Schwab, because he was no longer saying, this is my preference, or I know that my father would have liked to have been buried there, but I gave my word. And so Paro enabled Yosef to honor his word. But at the end of the day, there is a decline in the status of Yosef. This says Rav Schwab, is the tzaras, this is the beginning of the tzaras hashibud. This is the beginning of the decline. The Bnei Yisrael were at the apex of control, of success, when Yaakov was alive. And then when he passed away, that began to decline. What do we see? What is the connection between the closing of the Parsha and the closing of the eyes? Is it just some random word association? Rav Shimon says not at all. If you look at the last verse of Vayigash, which is the verse that is immediately adjacent to the first verse of Vaychi, and we read it. It says, "Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen." Israel lived in the land of Egypt, the land of Goshen. Vayeyach hazuva vayifru vayru mod. They were very successful. And Rav Schwab notes that it does not say Vayoch hazuva, they possessed it, but rather Vayeyach hazuva, they were possessed of it, or by it. The land possessed the Israelites. Meaning what? Meaning that the Jews, Bnei Israel, were so successful, they were so involved in their business that they didn't see that the situation was declining. This is a very relevant message to us. First of all, Lo Aleinu, we saw it in the Holocaust, where there were Jews who did not leave because, and it's understandable, because they didn't see the cloud formation coming, the storm approaching. They were, or if they saw it, they dismissed it because they had a life, a successful life. And all of us who are in Golus either are troubled or should be troubled when we see the winds of anti-Semitism and other destructive forces for the Jews and for others. And we ask ourselves, do we belong here? Do we belong elsewhere? Do we belong in Eretz Yisrael? We certainly belong in Eretz Yisrael. The question is when. And we have to be mindful that we could be so consumed by our material success in the land of the diaspora that we don't see the signals. This is the message of our Parsha according to Rav Shimon. Have a good Shabbos.